So welcome back everyone, it's Keith once again, and today we're going to take a quick look at the new Lian Li TU150. So the idea here is a small and somewhat portable ITX case that has a nice stainless steel structure, but features Lian Li's signature aluminum, exterior. So the idea here is you've got aluminum on the top, front, sides, and really that's all there is to it. So it's not a whole lot of extra panels than what you're normally used to. Now, what we're going to do is jump right into the case, and we're going to start with the top here. So the top is, again, full aluminum piece, and it's easily removable. And we're going to pull this off in just a second and show you one of the key features of this case. So around the front, you've got the power button, a USB Type-C, two USB 3.0s, as well as a headphone and microphone port and a reset button. So it keeps things pretty simple, clean, and right up there. Now, if you are wondering about the USB Type-C connector port, there's not a whole lot of motherboards out on the market that actually have that in the ITX form factor. In fact, this case does support DTX boards, which is what the new Maximus X570 Impact or X570 Maximus Impact, the one from ROG and the guys at ASUS, it does have a front USB 3.0 header. So if you want to take advantage of the 3.1, if you want to take advantage of that, that board will have it, and that board is a little bit bigger than your standard ITX, which is going to come in handy with something like this. Now, again, back to the top, we've got a handle on the top here. It is retractable. It pulls right out. It's spring loaded. And I will say one thing about it is right here on the front edge, it is getting worn pretty bad already, and I've not really used it too terribly much. I've used it a little bit, but not a whole lot. But while we've got the top here, before we get into the other sides, I want to show you one of the things that's really fun about this, but is also a point of contention later on. So it's easy to remove. See there, no tools were involved. It comes right off because it actually utilizes this ball and latch system. So you've got all of these points where it latches onto the case. Now I'm going to set this lid down here to the side, and we're going to talk about the interior of the top here actually houses your cable management. So think of this as the typical back of the motherboard tray. So all of your cables are going to run around the top. Well, most of them anyway are going to run from the top because your power supply is mounted in the top front, and the back side of it where your cables are, they're going to come up through the top here. So you can run cables around here. There's plenty of room up on the top, and I have no complaints with the way that this is done because you can fit a lot of cabling up in there. But before we move into the main portion of the chassis, I want to pop the back off here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to have it stripped down here in no time. So this is actually one of my few complaints with the case here, is because the back features the same deal here where you've got the ball and latch system. If there is anywhere that these cables are a little thick right through here and they're pushing out, it makes it really hard to rest flush against it. Now, I feel like they could have made a huge impact here by adding another ball point right here and here, because once it's connected, even with the way that I've got it set up, it bulges out the side a little bit. It doesn't have any trouble latching on. We'll go ahead and put it back on just to show you that it does go on there. But I don't know if you can see it in the video from here. It's not flush in the middle. So that's a little bit of a complaint, but let's pop this back off and take a quick look at the cable management on the back. You can see here there are quite a few tie-down points for your cables, as well as right here there's a mount for your 2.5-inch drive. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But you've got almost adequate CPU cutouts. You see here with this Gigabyte B450 ITX motherboard, the back plate's a little bit obscured. Another thing I want to point out here, and I want to take a moment and say thank you to FSP for supplying the power supply here, because we had everything else going but couldn't do a full build without a power supply, and those guys stepped in and really helped us out here, is the flat cables. Definitely gonna want to make sure that whatever power supply that you get there has the nice flat cable. So let's go ahead and reattach this, even though it's bulging out a little bit. And before we get into the main part of the case here, I want to take a look at the front. So a lot of people at first would probably say it's completely closed off, not a lot of room for ventilation, but this is pretty open. The sides here, I don't have a flashlight handy, but I would shine right through. So this whole thing it's very fine mesh, but it's wide open, and as well as on the bottom. So right here, this whole section is open for a fan. Now, I will put note here The case does not come with a fan. It doesn't come with any fans. So that's a bit of a bummer. So see there, front comes right off. It's actually got the ball points on the case, and it's just a little receiver there. But I'm gonna set this down here to the side, get it out of the way, and you'll see here you've got a mount for a 120 millimeter fan as well as a dust filter. So dust filter there. I've got a Noctua NFF12 in there, and we do have some thermal results to talk about here shortly. But before we get to those, let's attach this back on here. You know what, let's go ahead and put the top back on it too so I don't knock it over or anything, and get it kind of out of the way. So you guys can see how easily that goes back together. So let's talk about the very back before we get into the inside of the case. So the very back is very standard affair, 120 millimeter fan mount there. You've got 3 slots down here, and that's part of that DTX support. It's got this little setup. I'm not a big fan of this where you undo this and you can slide it back, then screws. It's kind of redundant because it screws into the PCIe, plus you've got that. But I guess if you're moving it around a lot, maybe you'll want that. And if you notice, I do not have a fan installed on the rear here, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that the cooler that I'm using, the Noctua NH-U12A, sits so close to it that if I put a fan in there, it actually would just be fan and mounted it right up against the fan. So I would probably have actually been better off if I took the fan off the heatsink and mounted it to the case and just let it pull out that way, but that's not the way the cooler was designed. But as we get into that, let's go ahead and take the glass side panel off. And I really like the way they did this. Make sure I don't have a ton of reflections in there. So they've got this kind of vanity cover here, and that covers up the power supply on the inside. So even though the FSP 550 watt Dagger Pro, it was really good power supply for this case, and it actually is kind of tucked away and very, well, minimal. This definitely makes for it to be a whole lot cleaner of an affair. So now that I got the glass panel off the side, let's turn it a little bit to where you guys can see it. Actually, most of the way where you guys can see it. I can tilt it back. But if you look here, as far as storage space that you have for storage devices, you've got a 2.5 inch drive here. And in this spot here, we've got the SK Hynix Gold S31 SSD. Got it in for review. We're gonna take a look at that here soon. Up in the top, we've got a 4 terabyte Seagate Sshd, the Fire CUDA style hard drive up there on the top, and you can see the 3.5 inch. This is the only place you can mount it. It won't fit here, but you can fit another 2.5 inch here. So if you had 2 SSDs and you wanted to mount one there, or if you just wanted to squeeze an SSD behind the tray, I mean, you could do that too. But honestly, I'm not really a big fan of that location. I mean, it is out of the way and it's covered up by the vanity plate on the side panel, but I almost wish they would have made this a little bit less deep on this side, because even with the U12H, there's about thickness in my hand between the cooler and the side panel, so you could actually fit a taller cooler in there. I don't know that I would really push it because it was really hard to get the clips on there with that hard drive installed. And I always like to fill up these kind of cases to give you like a, if you were to fully occupy it, what would it be like? And as far as the cooler there, again, that's the Noctua NH-U12S, and you can see there's plenty of room for that in there. And the video card that we used here is an RTX 2080 Super, and there is enough room down there that if you wanted to, you could mount an extra pair of 120 millimeter fans to the bottom. And I do want to take a moment to have a bit of a complaint here. There is no dust filter on the bottom. However, because this is stainless steel, you can get a magnetic dust filter to put on it. Why Lian Li didn't include one for the bottom, I couldn't tell you. It's a little disheartening that they didn't. Would have been a really good spot to have one. They got one on the front, and then one on the bottom would have been great. And they do have really nice tall feet here that if you wanted to remove them, you could. I just don't know that I would. They got a nice rubber base, and they keep the case plenty off the ground to let air kind of suck in, as well as the dust. But what about thermals, you ask? We talked about the fans, and well, we took the setup that you see, and I put a Ryzen 9 3900X in here. So we've got a 12 core part and 24 threads, 32 gigs of RAM on a B450 board. It's actually one of the better performing setups for the 3900X that I've come across, and a 2080 Super in there. And let's take a look at how the thermals did. The CPU itself, while running loops of Cinebench, we see the idle, well, of course not when it's running, the idle sits at about 38.5 degrees Celsius stock. and 36 in an open air environment, and then 36.4 with the single fan. Now under load, you can see it getting up to 83.3 with stock. That's no additional fans. Add another fan and you get over a 2 degrees Celsius drop, and that's a very modest fan. That fan's not going to be the highest performing fan for getting air through the case. Open air, however, you see it drop down to 79. So you don't get it's like a 2 degree step there. So 2 degrees with the fan, 2 more degrees without the fan. It's up to you how loud you want it to get. It actually runs a bit quieter with the fan. Now thermals for the GPU, didn't see much difference within the front intake fan. Stayed at 77 on the peak, open air got to 74. So about 3 degree rise being inside the case there. Now clock speeds are very interesting on the 3900X, and because they're very dependent on the thermals. So what kind of impact did the thermals have on the clock speed? Well, what we saw here was with an all-core boost on open air, we got 4550 megahertz consistently, and putting it into the case without a fan went down to 4400. With a fan, came back up another 100 megahertz to 4500. All core, that was very interesting. We saw a stock with the case at 4050, which was very similar to what I saw in my crosshair setup. But a case with an additional fan, we got 4150. So right about where I ended up with an all-core boost or all-core turbo or overclock on my own. But in open air, we saw I get up to 4200 megahertz across all cores. Now that did translate to better performance in Cinebench R20, showing the open air solution getting 525 CB single and 510 while in the case. And the multi-core score in open air being 7337 and dropping about 50 points down with the fan in the front to 7274, but fully stock at 7102 for the multi-core score, which isn't terrible. It's actually pretty good. It's better than my crosshair. So I might just keep using this and downsize and have a portable system. I don't know. Either way, the case itself, I was expecting worse thermals without the fans. You probably get a better result if I had moved one of the fans off of the heatsink onto the exhaust and let it be the exhaust for the heatsink. There's the option if I wanted to put an all-in-one, I could put it in the rear, or I could have put it up front. Definitely couldn't have done it in the bottom. While there is 2 120 millimeter fan ports on the bottom, you can't fit a 240 mil AIO plus the fans and the GPU. So I don't think I'd try to squeeze all that down there anyway. I think your best bet on here is going to be a good solid tower cooler and maybe a higher performance front intake fan. The fact that Lian Li does have really good fans, but they didn't bundle any with this case, I sort of get it. It's $110 for the silver or the black one, and you're getting a robust ITX case that has quite a bit of expandability. You can have 2 storage solutions plus your M.2, as well as a pretty beefy tower cooler. I mean, you're not going to be very limited on your graphics card. You could fit a big graphics card in this case. Something like the Amp Extreme, the Zotac Amp Extreme, I'm not sure about that, but I know the ROG Strix card could fit in here. So at the end of the day, Lian Li made a pretty nice little case. There are some concessions. You're going to want to take that into consideration. And I know the ITX market is very intense, but there's not a lot of options in this style that has this feature set. Again, I wish the attachment points on the side were a little bit more, or you could reinforce it with screws if you wanted to. But at the end of the day, I like the case. I think they did a good job on it. Good job, Lian Li. I'd like to see a revision with a fan added to either the rear or the front. You guys make good fans, put them in there, bring a little bit more value to it. All right, this has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case and ITX in general down in the comment section below. And make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so that we don't miss you in the next one.